isn't it great to get together in person as a group? Because I haven't seen some of you for maybe 2 years. Some of you I might have seen out in your community doing a speed watch scheme, or some of you I might have visited on your local ward that you represent, but I haven't seen most of you face to face for a long time, and it's so fantastic. And you realise how different the world is today, because I was at a funeral on Friday and I took my mum to this funeral. She's 81. And after we'd been to the funeral, been to the wake, and I said to my mum, let me drop you home now, she said, oh no, this is a day out. And you think how times have changed when you're thinking that about a funeral. So I think for us it's so nice to be together. That video was really inspiring, because so many of you have done things through the difficulty of the past few years with the pandemic, but you were doing amazing things before, so you know we didn't expect any less of you, to be fair. There's a few things that I just wanted to particularly flag. I mean, one of the main things about the vision for my office and through the police and crime plan, it is about having a safe, resilient and connected community. And you embody that in all the work that you do. You help your community be safer, be more resilient to challenges, and certainly you are connecting to your communities like nobody else. So I really want to thank you that we will not be the safest place in the country without your help. We keep going from 2 to 3, second or third safest. It's not good enough. While that is only crime rate figures, I still want us to be number 1. I want us to be the lowest crime rate with the highest number of domestic tourists, so we can be really smug that we do such a great job in Devon, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly to keep us safe, and we want to keep it that way. So thank you very much for all of your efforts. I just wanted to touch on the fact that obviously we have had G7 this year, and without the volunteers that really helped us look at the assurance processes for the temporary custody centres, luckily they weren't used that much, because the police are so good at managing protesters and managing what's going on in our communities that they barely have to use them. And I suspect if it was anywhere else in the country, those things would have been busy as anything. So again, something to be really proud of, and our volunteers really helped do the checks that was needed to make sure those temporary suites were working well. The other thing in particular is Community Speed Watch. Now there is an announcement I'm not allowed to announce because it's not public yet, but I'm sort of going to say, I won't say all the detail, but we've got the Perranworthal Community Speed Watch scheme here, but they have been going out day in, day out, to measure the speed on a particular road down in Cornwall, and 2 years they've been doing it. And they're at the point now where the council is really supportive to try and get them an average speed camera on that road. And there is no way that the council would be in any position to say yes without the evidence that that volunteer scheme has collected for a long period of time. So as you all know, I don't need to tell you this, commitment, persistence and being downright bloody awkward is the way that we get things done in this world. You have to not give up, and when you've got community groups and volunteers and councillors not giving up, being relentless, that is the way that we make the changes in our communities that we need to see. So really delighted to have you in the room face to face. We've got a nice day ahead of us. You're going to hear some really interesting stories. We've got our van outside for you to go and see if ever you wanted to borrow it for a community event or help us to come and support you at an event. And we've got a few great speakers with you that I'm going to hand over to now. One in particular, obviously, is the Deputy Chief Constable, Jim Colwell. His background, he was head of crime before, so if you want someone who knows all the real deep, dark depths, horribleness of Devon, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, it's Jim. He's now in a position where he has to be all upbeat and cheery as the deputy to really motivate the workforce, to really turn them around and make sure that we are at our best at performing and becoming that world-class police force that they'd like to be. So I'll hand over to Jim.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, death and misery is my stock trade, I'm afraid, as a senior investigating officer for years, so you get to know all the darkest shades of humanity, as you can imagine. But that's not what I'm here to talk about this morning, colleagues. Commissioner, colleagues, friends, family, it's absolutely my pleasure to be involved in this event today and to welcome you all to a rather dull and dreary St Mellion this morning. Hopefully the fog will lift and we'll see the 18th fairway at some stage during the course of the day. This is a really special moment for the force. And it's a really special moment for me to be involved in it, to recognise the contribution that all of you in this room have made in terms of, as the Commissioner says, connecting the force to our communities. And I'll draw on that in more detail in a moment or two. But today's theme is very much one of gratitude and thanks, and rightly so, colleagues. The last 2 years have been difficult for policing. The last 2 years have been difficult for policing in Devon and Cornwall in terms of the impact of the global pandemic and trying to find the right balance and path to tread as a police force in terms of enforcing regulations that were being constructed overnight, and being seen to do the right thing, the ethical thing, and the proportionate thing when faced with those challenges. That was a difficult line to take. As has been referenced already today, the contribution by some of you in this room to assist us in getting that balance right, very much appreciated. So it's been difficult locally, so there's been difficult times for policing nationally, and there's been difficult times for policing internationally. You know, whether we're talking about the conduct of Devon and Cornwall officers that hits the spotlight, whether we're talking about the tragic and senseless killing of Sarah Everard by a serving police officer in the Met, or whether we're talking about the death of George Floyd at the hands of an American policeman. Those events are seminal for policing, because each and every time one of those events takes place, one of those occurrences happens, people question their faith and trust and confidence in policing. They question it locally, they question it nationally, it gets questioned across the globe. So that bond of trust between policing and the public, that goes to the very heart of the British policing model. Policing is the public and the public are policing, is being tested right now, and it will be continued to be tested as we move forward. And I talk to our officers when they come into the organisation about their role that they need to play to strengthen that bond of trust through their conduct and their behaviour and their standards. But it is wider than that. It's a broader challenge for policing, and that's where yourselves come in. So the contribution that you make in terms of strengthening that bond of trust between policing and our local communities is immeasurable. And it's right and proper that we recognise that today, both through the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner and myself as representing the Chief Constable Sean Sawyer, to say thank you for that. Now, as has been said, volunteering, the roles that are represented in this room are varied and numerous. Whether you're a local councillor advocate, bridging that gap that often exists between local policing teams and communities, whether you're an independent custody visitor, holding the force to account in terms of the standards and quality within the difficult testing and dynamic environment that is our custody suites, whether you're a community speed watch or neighbourhood watch volunteer, and we've already heard about the impact that that can have at a really local level in terms of being a positive force for change around community safety. Or indeed, if you're one of our lived experienced volunteers, providing insight and understanding as to what it's like to be a victim of crime in Devon and Cornwall, which is so powerful and valuable to the force, something we often overlook, and we are often held to account for that by the Commissioner. All of you add value in different ways, but it is all equally meaningful, both to the force and our communities across Devon, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. You help us to drive improvements, you help us to solve problems, and you help us to maintain and improve our legitimacy when times are difficult. Now, Winston Churchill said a number of fine things during his life, one of which I think is particularly appropriate for today in terms of that theme of gratitude and thanks. And he said, "We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give." And so today is about recognising what you give to your communities, what you give to Devon and Cornwall policing. Because without it, we would be far poorer as a force, and our communities would see and feel it. So today, as I said, on behalf of the Chief Constable, personally from me as Deputy Chief Constable, on behalf of all the officers and staff that you work with on a regular basis, but most importantly, on behalf of communities across Devon and Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, thank you for what you give. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim. He's always seriously making us realise the seriousness of some of the work that we've got ahead of us in terms of building that relationship back with policing. I mean, we've got a few things always on the go about complaints about officers, or, you know, this happens in every force, but we've got some really big things coming up, and all of your support and help in that area will be really, really welcomed. Some of the things, though, Jim, I will say that policing can do, and they did only the other week, or it might have even been at the end of last week, because Felicity messaged me this morning about it. So 2 abandoned cars in a community in Plimpton, been there for 6 months. It seemed nobody could do anything about it. All I did was highlight to the police that there were these 2 cars, because I know they've got the ability to remove them. They've been down and they've actually removed them, and people were coming out thanking those officers from the community while they were doing it. Little things like that is how we really rebuild our confidence back. And I think that that's just a lovely little tiny story of antisocial behaviour and people being seen to get away with it, things being actioned. Really, really lovely. But in stark contrast to that, then obviously we've also had Keyham mass shooting, biggest in a decade for 10 years in the country. So we've had some really serious stuff hit us, the highs of G7, the lows of the Keyham mass shooting. And you're going to hear from Councillor Maddie Bridgman shortly as well about her involvement in that as a councillor advocate, and way more as you were doing things down there. But what I just wanted to explain to you, and this is why I think it's quite important, Jim and I don't hug. Right? We don't tend to hug, but I hug a lot of people. I spend quite a lot of my time noticing that people are feeling a bit down. And I can tell you, when the Keyham shooting happened and I turned up in Plymouth, and then the Chief Constable turned up, the first thing I wanted to do was hug him, but there were media cameras around everywhere. So I didn't. I hugged his staff officer instead. But I'm just saying, it's really important to be there emotionally for each other through really difficult times. And I can tell you, even when you are frustrated with the system, we are all here for each other to support each other through those difficult times. And it's so great to see you here today. And I can't wait to see Mike and Maddie having a chat in a bit about what it's like working with the local inspector and how it works there, because it's going to make a lot of you councillor advocates that don't have that envious, I think. And also you're going to hear from the issues around what it's like for the force to work with the independent custody visitors from Emma. So shall I hand straight over to Emma, Patrick? Or, yeah, Emma. We have Inspector Emma Fox, who's works at headquarters in Exeter, and she has the joy and luxury of overseeing some of the custody business, but particularly liaison with our office on it. So, Emma.
So, I'm Inspector Emma Fox. So I've been an inspector for 4.5 years, and I've worked in Camborne custody, Newquay custody, and the last year I've taken a strategic post where I assist the Chief Inspector, and we sort of oversee all the custody centres in Devon and Cornwall. So we're here to celebrate the contribution of volunteers working within the police family, and I've had the great experience of working with many volunteers. So prior to my post as a custody inspector, I was a neighbourhood team leader in Newquay. So I've worked with street pastors, I've worked with Neighbourhood Watch, I've worked with wellness officers, I've worked with the force chaplains, of course, and others that have come in and just assisted generally with gardening in the station and looking after our stationery store, all really valuable. If you ever see a stationery store in a police station, realise how valuable that chap is. He's brilliant because he keeps all the stationery up to date. It's great. So now I'm a custody inspector, and over the years I've developed some really good relationships with our volunteers and our ICVs. Now, custody is not the sort of environment you would imagine to find volunteers, but but actually the independent custody visitors are regularly seen in custody and add such great value. The reason I say it's not the sort of ideal environment that you would find volunteers, it can be quite a volatile place. Some of our clientele are not necessarily that welcoming, shall we say. And it's a very interesting place, and you get to meet lots and lots of different characters from all walks of life. So, you know, that's why I say it's not the sort of place that you would consider that we would have volunteers, but we have our ICVs that come in regularly. So the volunteers that come in have a diverse set, wide-ranging experience in life and in different areas, and they have numerous positive impacts on custody and are really welcomed by the custody team. One of the key values we hold as really important is transparency. So visitors can come at any time of the day or night, any day of the week, any week of the year to our custody centres, and we have 6, including the Isles of Scilly. And my hope and my belief is that at any time that they come, they will see good practice within the custody centres, with the detainee at the heart of all the decision making that can be seen. But it's really important, the transparency, so they can knock at any time, any day of the year, and we welcome them in. So the volunteers, they visit the detainees, they look at the centre, they speak to staff, and they pick up any issues and document them on a report form. These are then brought to my attention through my weekly meetings. Janet Heineman here as the OPC representative, and Julie Doughton as well, the ICV leader. So I'd like to say thank you to those 2 ladies for the last year. This is the first time I've met Janet in real life. We've been conversing for a year, and she told me that she was 7 foot tall, but obviously she's not 7 foot tall. Yeah, but yeah, we've only seen each other from the waist up, so it's like, wow, we are people. So it's been really nice to meet Julie, but I'd like to say thank you to them, because they've been very welcoming for in the last year, because this was a new post for me. So what's nice about our meetings is really we share amazingly good feedback we get from the ICVs and from the detainees actually as well. And all the feedback's really greatly received by our staff, and it's a real boost to know that their care that they give to the detainees, quite often in very difficult circumstances, is really appreciated. So custody can be a very challenging environment, but the good feedback really does give the staff a boost. So, you know, we really do appreciate that feedback. So occasionally we do have issues to talk about, and these can be both positive, and they can have a positive impact on our practice as well. So we haven't actually had any issues that we've not been able to resolve, have we, in the last year, which is good. And things like checking the availability of religious material and things that we talk about at the moment. The emergence of neurodiversity issues is something that the ICVs are really having a positive impact on, and the influence in our direction as well about how sort of we want to move in the next year or so with those issues. So the ICVs are also able to assist us in evaluating things that we try in custody. So a year or so ago we introduced some distraction tools, some phone footballs into custody. And we give them to those detainees that really perhaps need their mind taking off the fact that they're in custody. They might be a little bit uncooperative, but we found that just simple things like giving them a phone football has really helped. It's helped with their engagement with us as staff, but it's also meant that while they're kicking a football around, they're not bashing the door, and their whole behaviour. So we've been able to look at that, and we've had some really good feedback from detainees via the ICVs about those. So that's really good. So we use that positive feedback that we get via the ICVs quite often, and we use that to influence best practice in all our centres. So we rolled those phone footballs out across the centres, and they're used commonly now. But our meetings are a two-way process, so where we can resolve issues and share great feedback, great initiatives, and we make sure that the detainees' voices are heard in those meetings, and that's really important. So recently we've had to develop our practices. COVID came and we had a challenge because ICVs weren't allowed to come in to the stations for obvious reasons. So how are we to remain transparent? We had numerous conversations about how can we still remain transparent during this time. So we made some adjustments, and we were keen to do some virtual reviews, which we did do. And Julie particularly reviewed some redacted custody records. And this was really important because the face-to-face reviews were suspended, but we needed to make sure that we were still transparent, and there was still some checking about that, that we were doing, what we were meant to be doing during that time. So that was a really interesting time, but nevertheless, we carried on, and we were able to achieve what we needed to achieve during that time. And then, as we already mentioned, during G7, we had some satellite reception centres, and the ICVs visited those prior to their use, and also during the G7 time. But like you said, they weren't actually used very much, which was really good. We were expecting something like 200 prisoners a day. That was what was planned for, and I think we ended up with maybe 50 over the week. 49, there you go, 49. So, and we had planned for 200 a day. So that just shows you, that we had planned for them, and we did have these reception centres, but we didn't actually use them, which was great. But the ICVs were important because they came and looked at them first, and made sure that they were happy, and they even gave us feedback about different things that we could do. So yeah, we had to adapt, but I'm pleased to say that the ICVs now are back in person, and so our sort of traditional method of feedback is back with us, which is really good. So in summary, volunteers are a welcome addition to the custody environment. They provide reassurance to the public in relation to standards within custody, and ensure that the voice of the detainee is heard. And we're able to share new ideas for the ultimate aim of all of us, which is really to make custody the best environment it can be, where the detainee's care is at the heart of everything we do.
So first of all, I'm going to ask you to tell me a bit about yourself. Mike, do you want to tell us what you do?
Is this on?
It's on, yeah.
Oh, well, that's all right then. Oh, well, Mike Joyce here, Town Councillor. I was fortunate enough because when the police advocates first started up, Alison and Vicky came to me and said, would I like to get involved? I think they regretted that decision very early on. It's one of the best things I've ever got involved in. It's brilliant. Looking at you all here today as advocates and others, you know what I'm going to say. It works. But it works in Newton Abbot slightly different probably, because from a very early on, we got involved with David and his predecessor in having regular meetings. We sat there and we talked about the various things, and I look at it as what I call the big 3 C's. They're integrated, but they're part of each other. And that is communication. We listen, we talk, we understand. Cooperation. We cooperate with each other in a way that's slightly different probably than others do. And then we have a commitment. As a councillor and as David and our sergeant, we meet on a fortnightly basis for half an hour, 45 minutes via Teams, which some people don't like and others do, and we sit down and we talk about the problems and concerns that we as advocates find and get reported to us, and we also hear from the officers about how they perceive what's happening in Newton Abbot. I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let David have a chat.
Typical politician, you didn't actually answer the question that I asked.
That's training for Alison, you see.
David, would you like to tell us?
Just remind me of the question, I'll try and answer.
How did you become a neighbourhood inspector, I suppose, is another.
Okay, well, first neighbourhood role I had was Oakhampton, West Devon, which is our biggest sector in terms of rurality. So it's about 450 square miles. That was in 2007, so before Teams, before Skype, before any of us knew anything like that, before pandemics. And that was unique because there are 51 parish councils there, there are multiple mayors, and so in terms of actually managing to work with communities, to work with councillors and to work with people who were really proud of the community they were, it was a real challenge because you couldn't go to 51 parish councils, you couldn't go to, couldn't even go to the town council meetings. So they had a link system, they brought people together, they had 3 links meetings. And what I learned there was how much people valued their communities, how much work they did for their communities. And so I felt it was really important as a police officer that we actually engaged properly with them. So I would go to those links meetings, they were quarterly, and the bonus out of it was obviously you built contacts within the communities, and you understood what was important. And what I found was important wasn't sort of bold figures and statistics, it was actually the reality of what was happening, so you could talk to them about what was happening. And then I moved back closer to home, went to Newton Abbot in 2010, and continued in that vein where you could have physical meetings, town council meetings, you could go to annual general meetings for parish councils, and you'd build those links. And I went and did a stint in headquarters in learning and development and came back, and I'd known Mike from my previous time in Newton Abbot and came back into a very different world where you couldn't have face-to-face meetings. And that's where we were having the online meeting fortnightly. We had it weekly, I think, initially, but there wasn't enough time for Mike to say everything. Just so so we went to fortnightly, and it's not a massive meeting, and it's relatively straightforward. I mean, I'm renowned for sort of playing things down, but it's actually a really easy thing to do if you want to sort of just connect with links in your community, key individuals who will give you a really good idea as a police officer who's responsible for local policing about what's concerning people in their communities and what's important to them. And that isn't always the same as what's important to us or what we think is important to us as the police. So you need that nudge from people who are connected to tell you what it's about. But the reverse is sometimes the community needs that nudge from us to say we've got this as well that we're dealing with, and that's why it works so well, because we can have a really open discussion about the things that are important both ways. And I'm probably going on to other questions, so I'll shut up.
No, you carry on.
You did a great job, David. You carry on. I'm going to sit down in a minute.
I've not been able to understand why it doesn't roll out so easily everywhere else, because to me it saves me time. It's fairly easy to do. There'll be challenging questions, and I think we know each other well enough, and we've developed a trust to have those difficult conversations when it's challenging. But that's not a problem. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to understand what is important. So I like them. I enjoy them. I enjoy connecting with the community, and for me it saves me a huge amount of time. It deals with issues that might come in as a complaint if we haven't dealt with them in those meetings, and then having someone like Mike or Phil as the town clerk to actually then take it back into an environment where they can say, well, this is why the police are doing what they're doing. And so I enjoy them, and I hope they carry on.
Thank you very much. It's interesting for me to hear that you say it saves you time, because I think some neighbourhood inspectors might feel that it actually takes time. Why does it save you time?
Well, it saves time because if I wasn't talking to advocates who can then go back and talk to their community, I'd end up having to talk to lots of individuals within the community to justify our position. And, you know, we're like any other place. We've got an issue with some graffiti at the moment in one of our towns in King Stainton. And we roughly know who's doing it. It's young people. We need to engage with them, stop them doing it. It's causing some grief to the community. But I've actually got a really good relationship with the Councillor Advocate in that town and with the town clerk. And that means I can put a lot of stuff through those meetings to tell them what we're doing, rather than having to go to multiple people and deal with those issues. So it saves me huge amounts of time. It's common sense to me, so it makes sense.
Good to know. Good to know. Mike, can you tell me a little bit about your relationship with your constituents then, as a police, as a councillor?
Yeah, well, they all know who our advocates are in town, basically because it gets publicised regularly in the local press, and that I'm thankful for. But we get fed in through various methods, through our advocate scheme, through the various councillors, and also through the town council itself, through the office. So we get to hear, we walk up, we get told, we listen, we get approached in the town, but also because we're also involved in other methods within the town, namely through Chamber of Trade or through social clubs and other activities. And because they know we talk to the police on a regular basis, we pick up a lot of information which we can then feed through, which makes life easier for everyone concerned. So it's a two-way thing. We are there, we're approachable, and they know that we meet the police on a regular basis. Therefore, it becomes a lot easier for them to know where to channel their concerns. I think one of the things I would say that sometimes the perception of the public of what they see out there sometimes gets embellished as it goes along, improved upon. Social media's got a lot to answer for sometimes, but because we are connected with the public and we're close and we're hands-on, we can then approach them and find out what is actually the truth, what is actually going on out there, and we can feed that back. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does. Have you ever disagreed on an issue?
Disagree? No. Forceful, challenging? Yes. We understand as advocates, I think, that that resources are not as quantifiable as we would like. I was once asked when I met somebody from central government, what would be my ideal situation as regards to police force numbers in my area. And I said, yeah, that's quite easy to answer. A police officer on every corner of every street in Newton Abbot. And I think he looked at me as if I'd gone completely gaga. I said, you asked the question, I'll give you the answer. We know what happens, but we can, by feeding what we got into them, we can challenge. David, I know, he doesn't always get it easy right. He stood here and said he does, but he doesn't. He knows sometimes we say, well, this hasn't happened. Why hasn't it happened? We've been talked about this 2 weeks ago. Nothing's changed. And David can then tell us what's going on behind the scenes, which we would not necessarily know. There's a lot goes on behind the scenes that we don't need to know about. We just need reassurance.
And and you've touched upon your column in the Mid-Devon Advertiser, haven't you? How did you set that up?
I wanted to do a service to the officers in the force generally, not just locally. So I approached my local newspaper and said, look, I'm an advocate. I want to get this out. And they said, okay, we'll give you a column every 2 weeks. I didn't realise exactly what I was going to let myself in for, mind you. But, and as Phil will know, when I start typing, I finish up with about 2,000 words, which is not a column size at all. So I then started to I wanted to embellish it a bit, so I've covered such things as victim support, cadets, the Office of Police and Crime Commissioners, the list, custody suites, the whole list. I've gone through, and I thank each and every one of those departments for giving me the information to be able to put out there and explain to the public who probably, on the whole, don't know what goes on behind the scenes. I wanted it to be a column that would advise them, inform them, and give them a bit more of an insight, like drones, for instance. How many people see drones flying about, but do they really know what happens? The road policing team, and about the police cadets. I've been fortunate. I've had the heck of a assistance from the Department of the Police and Crime Commissioner, and I thank you, Alison, and your staff for that. You get an awful lot of emails from me. But there is, if I may say so, take this opportunity, there's a gap, which I'm still trying to fill in my column. And that is, I have yet to interview Alison as a Crime Commissioner on her own, and I've also got to do the Chief Constable and others. So they're here today, they can't get away from me, they're going to get caught. But I wanted it to be an informative. I didn't want it to be negative, I wanted it to be positive about what the police are doing. So I'm using my advocate's role as, it was called the Musings of an Advocate, it's now called Advocates on the Beat. And the feedback I've had, Patrick, been going now for nearly 12 months, has been absolutely phenomenal, more than I thought. And when it missed one fortnight, and I had umpteen phone calls from people saying, where's your column, Michael? Get it back in there. We love reading it because we now know what the force is up to. And I've done a bit on advocates, folks. I've told them what we do, so that they know that we don't just have a title, we actually have a meaning, and that is working with you guys.
Very interesting. So if you had any advice for advocates in the room who might set it up, would you say do it monthly? Is bi-weekly a bit of a challenge?
It has to be what suits them, and it's like the same as basically police advocates. What works, one size does not fit all. What works in Newton Abbot may not work in other parts of the area, Devon and Cornwall. I think each advocate has got to look at its own area, see what time they can commit to. If you're talking about the column, it does take me about, I've got about 4 already lined up. It does take time to get going. But it is, I think it's worth it. But I would say don't look at the Newton Abbot scheme as a way to follow. Use it as a template to suit yourselves. What works in your area must work in your area. All I would say is, from the experience I've got in dealing with the local forces, by God, I wouldn't go back to the old ways.
Question for David. Sorry, you look like you were about to respond
Not
to
off.
I was just going to say, yeah, I absolutely agree with Mike. There'll be different variations of the same scheme that will work for you. And our meeting's quite a small, compact meeting, so we can have that fortnightly. Other areas will maybe have, attendance around sort of 30, maybe more. And that starts to get challenging to actually get that one-to-one input. I think it's Jeff Bezos. He won't have a meeting where he can't feed them with 2 sort of pizzas. So if it's any bigger than that, he won't do the meeting. But it's an adaptable scheme, and there's nothing to stop you having a frequent meeting with a smaller group and then a quarterly meeting with that wider group to bring in more people. There's all sorts of ways you can do it. I think that the absolute key thing is just that regular contact and that openness to share information appropriately, but to build that trust between the advocates and the local police force.
And I'm going to put you on the spot now and talk about policing priorities for you. What are your policing priorities as a policing team, and how do they differ from what you sometimes hear from Mike?
Okay, well, it's a challenge. The policing priorities from us as an organisation will always differ from the policing priorities of a community, because our priorities will be wider, they'll be nationally linked, so violence against women and girls will be a priority. Now, I've no doubt that everyone here would also put that in as their priority list, but if I was asking you as individuals for your community what your challenge is, it wouldn't be the first thing that came to mind. We've got to look at those areas, so that allows me to talk to the advocates to say, these are things we're working on, but absolutely understand that as Alison was saying, that some of the smaller issues, like 2 vehicles that are sort of abandoned, can really impact on someone's life, on their well-being and welfare, and how they feel about living safely in their environment. So I would say the priority for me coming into policing, full stop, because I came in at quite a late age, was to make sure my children could grow up safely in the community they grew up in. That was the simple priority, and to work in public service. And that's probably still there, so it's still the same thing really, is to make sure that the community I live in, the community I work in, is a place that people feel safe to enjoy, and that can be at all levels. So my team will be working hard to deal with illegal drugs and things like that, but they'll also be working hard to make sure that 2 neighbours who've just completely broken down in terms of a relationship and is starting to impact on the whole area around them, that we can meet the needs of that and deliver that as well. So it's wide and varied, and I think everything is important. It's easy to say everything's a priority, but the meeting allows us to focus on areas that we wouldn't necessarily do as a wide priority, an organisational priority.
Don't forget though, David, we don't always save things up for the fortnight. If something urgent comes up, that as advocates we feel that there's a need to engage with David in particular, or the sergeant, we will email them prior to the meeting to say this is a concern, and normally, and every time in fact, we do get a reply back saying, yeah, we are aware of this, or we weren't aware of this, but we are now, so that at the fortnightly meeting we can get an update on something that's happened in between. We don't always hold off for every fortnight, because sometimes we need to have a reassurance, or need to have some information that we can pass on to our residents and businesses.
Yeah, I mean, on that, the fortnightly meeting allows you to build that relationship and trust. So Mike's rung me when I've been mowing the lawn. And I've said, Mike, I'm mowing the lawn, but let's talk about what we need to do. And that's, you know, Mike didn't know I was mowing the lawn. I think he probably wouldn't have rung me if he'd known, but never know. But
We've got spies everywhere, David.
But it allows you to have that relationship that means that you can address things as they come up, but you can just touch base at that fortnightly meeting to make sure you're on track and you're dealing with things that are important.
I wouldn't go backwards, I'll tell you that now. The relationship we've got with our local force, I wouldn't go back to what we had prior. There was a need, and I keep coming back to Alison, to having the foresight, and it was mentioned in Parliament, Alison.
Yeah.
I think we were one of the first ones to set things going, and I take my hat off to Vicky, who spent a lot of hours mulling over the details of it. It's a scheme I'm proud to have been a part of, and it's a scheme I will continue to focus on, even if when I come to re-elections, I shall miss it if I don't become a councillor. I don't quite know what I'm going to do with all my time. But I thank you for setting it up, and that's from me personally as an individual, but from our town council as well. And it shows, you say the number's gone from 150 to 300 plus. That shows it works. That shows it is working, and there's a need for it. And I thank you all for being part of it, because without you, there wouldn't have been an advocate scheme.
What got you involved in being a councillor, first of all, let alone a council advocate? How did you get involved in your community?
Oh my goodness, I actually campaigned to save Plymouth Airport, and it is still there. I will say that. And I was actually approached by several different parties and asked me if I wanted to stand. So that's how I got involved. I was just very passionate about something, wanted to help, tried to help. And like I say, it's still there, sort of 10 years on.
So what took you from having an interest in business and aviation into having an interest in crime and policing?
It was, well, I used to go along to the Have You Say meetings. We have Have You Say meetings sort of every few months, and the police officers always used to come along. And I met a particular sergeant. It was actually the Sergeant Dave Ratcliffe at Crown Hill. And he said to me, why don't you get involved with this, you know, Alison's launched this scheme, it'll be right up your street, so why don't you get involved? So that's literally how it really started.
And do you hear a lot from your constituents about crime? Is that high on their agenda, or ASB?
I'm very lucky in my ward particularly, because we have got a really good police presence, and being part of the scheme is amazing, because I can go to your office and actually say, can you help me with X, Y, Z? And I'm guaranteed within a few days I do get a response, and my team, team at Crown Hill, just superb. You know, they're really quick, responsive. And they don't always reply to my emails, which is a bit of a niggle, but actually they do. The things get done. You know, the burnt out motorcycle gets moved on, or the graffiti gets sort of, the lads at the park with the graffiti sort of get moved on and things. So things happen sort of quietly just behind the scenes.
So tell us, and we're going to come to the part you played in Kearman in a minute, but tell us a little bit about how you developed that relationship. You dealt with some other issues about theft in your area, didn't you?
No, it wasn't theft. It was actually Sergeant Radcliffe actually came to me and said one of the biggest problems in the ward was actually the multi-storey car park, which the council built right opposite Glenbourne unit, which is a mental health unit at the hospital. So people would be discharged. They were, had mental capacity, so discharged, and literally they go straight across to the multi-storey car park, sit up the top, threaten to throw themselves off, and demand wine and pizza. This was causing the police a huge amount of trouble, because basically, I've just realised I'm talking to you and not talking to everybody else. So basically, there were several police officers had to go out, the fire brigade had to go out. People just sort of liaison officers sort of talk the person down, so all this resource was being used up, and I found out that the hospital were getting £2.4 million of income from this car park. So basically, myself and the Sarge went along, and I threatened to shut the car park down unless they made it safe. And they said, well, that's going to cost millions and millions of pounds. I said, no, well, I could go up with a staple gun and some chicken wire and just fill in the gaps. And I said, I'm a size 16 woman and I can get through the gap. Imagine if a child got out of a car and ran straight up. It's just basically really, really bad design. So we set up a meeting, and they sent their PA. not the head of security. So I basically said, right, you go back to him, you tell him you've met the worst woman in the world and I mean business. Within 3 days we had that meeting, and between us, we worked together with the hospital, we got the car park safeguarded, and it cost £50,000. And the other thing I noticed was there was no CCTV to protect their staff, just the pay stations. So that's now been installed as well, and that was that first piece of work we did together. But more recently, during COVID, we had a massive traveller problem. The travellers come to Plymouth for a summer holiday and we don't want them. Actually, Councillor Pengelly is doing some really great work with the police regarding the travellers as well. We had, the problem I had was up at Woolwell. One side of the road was Plymouth, the other side of the road was covered by Ivy Bridge. So I had to actually get the police to actually talk to each other and arrange to go up together. So suddenly, instead of just a PCSO going up to sort of talk to travellers, they were a really nasty, nasty bunch and causing huge problems. They were defecating in the street, they were going to Tesco's and using the toilets there and stealing, and it was just absolutely dreadful. The vandalism was horrendous. So got the police officers both speaking together, 2 sergeants rocking up together, and in with about a week. This was during lockdown as well, so it was even worse. People were so upset, the pandemic, we were wearing masks, and these travellers were just absolutely running rack and ruin. But both officers, the sergeants went in, sorted it all out. With about a week or so, they were actually gone. So it was a really, great, because of that relationship again with the police and with the office.
So that's bridging the link, isn't it, between council and the force. So great work there. Bring you on to the awful events of August the 12th. Our van, our community engagement van, which is outside downsteps, we took that along to support the victim support effort there, and you volunteered then as well, didn't you?
I did. I saw my photo and I nearly died because, oh my goodness, I was supposed to be litter picking. I had a group of litter pickers in my ward waiting for me, so I had to make some phone calls. I'm actually the Deputy Lord Mayor of Plymouth as well. So first thing in the morning I turned on my emails to see how I could help, because the atrocities all sort of started kicking off about 9 o'clock at night. Suddenly the media were there were helicopters everywhere. It was absolute chaos in Plymouth. And no one really knew what had happened, and it was frightening. It was really, really frightening. And I was up and dressed anyway to go litter picking, and I saw, I think it was either your email or Mick's email, saying the police car commissioner is going to be in Plymouth. Is any advocates available to go and help? So I didn't know what I was going into, but I had to go and sign the book of condolence in town anyway. So followed the Lord Mayor's car because she was going up to lay flowers, and arrived and obviously met you, and we spent sort of up to about 3 o'clock that day sort of protecting Alison from the press more than anything, but also just giving out leaflets and talking to people. And there were groups of children. There was a little girl walking around in her pyjamas, and it's because she couldn't go back to her house just to get some clothes on. It was so difficult hearing the stories from people that had actually witnessed, a gentleman who'd just got home from work, and he thought it was a car backfiring. But the victim support people came along as well, and I didn't know what I was doing. I just went to see if I could help, and I did. Gave out quite a few leaflets and things, chatted to lots of people, and I'm shaking actually, remembering it. But it was emotional, but I'm really proud to have been part of that and to be able to help that day. It meant a huge amount. So.
It was great to have the professional support there as well from victim support, who
absolutely
understood more about that, the effects of an atrocity like that on that community, wasn't it? Yeah. So how are you involved now in the recovery effort from Kean?
No, because it's not my ward, so that's the ward councillors are actually involved in sort of doing that and things. So obviously the leader of the council, he's secured some funding and things from government. So.
But it's had quite a positive effect in Plymouth, actually, in some regards, in that it has brought people together quite a lot.
Absolutely, absolutely. And our leader, Nick Kelly, he actually, because we had the firework night, the firework championship was always held in Plymouth in August, and it was delayed, obviously, because of COVID, and we were really excited putting it on, getting people back into Plymouth and things, and it was actually the following week. And he came up with the idea of having green hearts, because we had green hearts created, Plymouth Together, because Plymouth, the green colour, Plymouth Argyle. So we had green hearts actually on Smeaton's Tower on the Hoe, and we arranged for 5 red hearts to be the first fireworks. and he also came up with the idea that we all stood and gave a minute's silence and all stood on the hoe with our camera phones, and it was so incredibly moving. Just looking across to Jennycliff and the surrounding areas and Cornwall and things, and just see people just stood out there with their lights on their phones, just in memory of the people of Plymouth. So it was, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm talking too much, aren't I?
No, not at all. Aside from Kean, what next for you in your neighbourhood and working with your policing team? What's next on the agenda for you?
I'm up for re-election next year, and oh goodness, it's such hard work. I'm not going to lie. This week, I don't think I'm going to be home much before 10 o'clock because I've got national mayor duties as well. I've got lots on this week. I don't know.
What are your community priorities?
Community.
What do people in your ward get most upset about?
Oh my goodness, where to start? To be fair, they're not that bad. I think graffiti is a problem. Speeding, of course, you mentioned the speeding. I think that's something that I would be really, interested in rolling out as well. I don't know. Can I just mention something else, actually? One great thing about being a police advocate is you get to go out with the police. And I went out with traffic, and it was so cool. And I was on taxi licensing, and we got sort of, some dodgy taxi drivers come along to, if they've got any sort of convictions or whatever, so they'd come before the panel. So I actually spoke to the traffic police through your office or Alison's office, and said, how can I get to go out with them, to look at taxi drivers? So they said, oh, rock up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I thought, oh, here we go. So, dark depths of the morning, and off we went, and we just went around the taxi ranks and actually looked at all, measured their tyres, checked the seat belts and things. But it's just so interesting. And then on the way back to the station, they're actually based at Plimpton, we had a blue light situation. I was sat there and I loved it, absolutely loved it. So if nothing else, get in with your traffic police because they do an incredible job. And it's great fun, and everyone stares at you. So I was always dressed good because people do stare at you walking around with the police and think, what's she been up to? So.
An insight patrol is worth doing as well. I used to be a reporter and reported on crime and policing for years and years and years, but going on an insight patrol with them after I joined this office completely changed my view of what they do. So
I have to ask about that one.
Yeah, it is challenging. It's interesting, isn't it? Okay, well, thank you very much for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to add about the scheme?
No, just don't go because we love you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. For someone who's nervous, some closing remarks.
Well, who'd have thought that the scheme that was invented only a few years back had turned into something really productive with policing. We know in particular, this is quite funny, and the reason I was just checking Mike was in the room, is Mike is persistent, as you know what it's like, persistence, and that persistence annoyed the local policing team. That's why you have such regular meetings, because you've got so much to talk about with what's going on in your community. And I just want you to know, this is why I love the scheme so much. The chair of the Chamber of Commerce, Nikki Bidgood, I've pointed her in your direction to talk about local policing.
Thank you very much.
I'm like, go to Mike. Mike will sort it all out.
Oh, thank
so,
you.
It's that's what we're trying to do, is help the local communities manage everything themselves as much as possible so that it doesn't have to always come up to the corporate entity and we can get on with things. So really, really incredible. And Mike's been there from the very beginning. And I tell you what, Vicky Booty, why did she leave? We miss her so much. We'd love to have her back any time, I have to say. The other thing as well, just about Kean, Maddie, I mean, one of the things that's been quite incredible is how everybody has come together with that incident. But it was really emotional and it was really frightening, and we actually didn't know what we were doing either, but turning up, doing our best to be there in case we could do things. And the other thing that I think has been really important, so you were representing my office and victim care on that day, you were representing a range of different things on that day, but I've also allowed people, and if this is something that you might be interested in, so Maddie has also represented me at an awards ceremony for policing in Plymouth when I couldn't make it. So there are opportunities for Councillor Advocates to be able to do things on my behalf if you want to, and if you've got ideas about what that could be, then do let me know. I'm more than happy for you to represent me in your local community. We just need to talk, make sure we know what we're doing, and then you can do that. I'd love to have more of that opportunity, because there's only one of me for the whole of Devon, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, and that's why it's so important to have the volunteers to be in that community. I am everywhere but nowhere hardly, so because we've got this infrastructure here, so absolutely fantastic.